Hi, my name's Jackie Davis, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to make chicken and noodles. Every region or every state in the country has kind of their own regional specialty food. Typically they're comfort foods, and here in Indiana, at least here in central Indiana, ours is chicken and noodles. To start with, I'm going to go over the ingredients and the equipment that you're going to need. You'll see that it's a pretty low cost, low tech type of food to make. For the ingredients, we're going to need eggs, whole eggs, just regular table salt, cream or half and half, or if you're really in a pinch, you can use evaporated milk, flour, just general all-purpose flour. And for the equipment, you're going to need a rolling pin later on, a cutting board later on, a sharp knife later on that we'll talk about in detail then, a fork, and a large mixing bowl. So let's get started. To start with, we're going to just crack our eggs, and for eggs you're going to need, or for quantities, you're going to need one egg for about every 2 people that you feed. So I'm going to do a 2-egg recipe today, and that will feed about 4 to maybe 6 people depending on how much they eat. So you're just going to crack those in your bowl. Okay, and then you're going to put just a few shakes of salt in there just to season it a little bit. And then in order to put the cream in, this is kind of the fun part. And when you talk about noodle making, there's not really an official recipe. It's kind of a handed down thing from one person to another. And I learned this from my mother, and this is her technique and her kind of recipe. And so the cream, you're going to do 1/2 shell of cream for every egg that you've got in the bowl. So I've got a 2-egg noodle that I'm making, so I'm going to put 2 half shells of cream in. And if you measured this out, it would probably be about 1 tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of cream. And what we're going to do is you're just going to mix that up, break the yolks, mix that all up so that there's no egg or egg yolk or egg white, really, really thick in there. Okay, then we're going to start adding our flour. And for the flour, you're going to add in 3/4 to about 1 cup of flour. You don't have to measure it, just kind of dump it in. What you're going to try and do is add the flour and mix it up so that you can get it cohesive enough so that you can put it out on a large floured board and kind of knead it to the consistency that you need for the eggs. Once it starts kind of coming together, you can kind of lose the fork and start working it with your hands, because that's really where the fun comes in. Oops. So I'm going to get rid of my fork now, and I'm just going to start mixing in my flour in the bowl. And when it gets to a nice, like I said, cohesive state, and it gets kind of doughy but still wet, you can get a nicely floured surface out here, just dump a bunch of flour on it, and then you're just going to try and incorporate that flour as you knead your noodles. So as you can tell, my hands get kind of messy in this, and so if you're someone who doesn't like messy hands, probably not a good project for you. But I find it kind of relaxing. It reminds me of making bread dough or something along those lines. And I just kind of find it, relaxing to knead out the dough. As you're kneading, what you want to do is get a dough that's nice and elastic, but not too wet, so that later on when you cut it, you don't have a lot of sticking issues. And frankly, this is the hardest part of noodle making, is knowing when to stop adding flour to your dough. But the more you practice, the easier it gets, and the better you get at it in making noodles. So that's pretty good. I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to let it just sit and rest for about 10 minutes. Let it relax, and then we'll come back and roll it out. Now we're going to take our dough that we've mixed up and let rest for a little while, and we're going to roll it out into noodle dough. So the first thing you want to do is to lightly flour your surface that you're going to roll on. And you're going to take your dough and you're going to cut it just into some smaller pieces, because when you roll it out, you're going to roll it out pretty thin, so you don't want a big gigantic piece of dough. So I just kind of mash it out with my hand first, and then I take my rolling pin, put a little bit of flour on it, and then I just start rolling. And you want to pick it up occasionally and put some flour underneath it so it doesn't stick. And what I like to do, here's the thing, the thinner you make it, the thinner your noodles, your final product noodles will be. What you have to remember is as the noodles cook, they're going to swell a little bit. So, you know, the thickness is all kind of dependent on you. I like my noodles a little less chewy and a little less thick. So I roll mine out pretty thin. And as a guide, maybe, you know, about the thickness or maybe half the thickness of an American cheese slice is what you're looking for. And you don't have to worry about making it perfectly round or perfectly square. You just roll it out. And then after you roll it out, you're going to put it on, you know, you can leave it on your couch or you can put it on some paper towel, and you're just going to let it dry out for a little bit, like an hour or 2 hours, just to dry it out so that when you cut it, it doesn't stick together. But you don't want it so dry that it's going to crumble when you cut it. It's time to cut our noodles. Before we get started to do that, we need to talk about the knife a little bit. This is a tomato knife, and it's got a very thin blade and a very sharp blade, and it's very serrated, as you can tell. And this is really the best knife to cut noodles with. I went ahead and put my noodles on a cooling rack to dry a little bit, and they dried a little bit more quickly. It's been an hour, and so they're nice and they're not tacky. They're ready to be cut. So, to cut them, put them on our cutting board. And we're going to cut them in fourths. And then we're going to stack them. And we will roll them up. And we'll start cutting our noodles. And as I talked about when we were rolling the noodle dough out, you know, the thinner you make it, the less thick, you know, the noodles are going to thicken as they cook. As they take on liquid, they're going to thicken up a little bit. So whenever you cut your noodles in width, you want to make them much thinner than what you think you need. So you really need to cut them less than 1/4 of an inch thick. I'm cutting mine, and I don't know if you can see, hopefully you can, that they're less than 1/4 of an inch thick here, and then you're going to get these little rolls, and I won't do the whole thing. But what you need to do after that is just kind of open them up and separate the rolls out. And if you find that they're sticking when you're cutting them, add a little bit of flour to your noodles before you cut them, before you roll them up and to cut them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our noodles, and they're going to dry again. But to do that, then we're just going to get a large clean dish towel, and you're going to kind of pile them in there and kind of loosely cover them up for the night or for a few hours, whichever it takes, just to let them dry out just a little bit more. Before we put them in the chicken broth to cook them. To make the actual chicken and noodles, you're going to want about 1 to 2 cups of chicken broth per person. You can buy canned broth or you can make your own broth. And then I've added about 1.5 cups of pre-cooked chicken to it. You can add more, you can add less, that's completely up to you. Bring the broth to a complete rapid boil and then start dropping your noodles in. And like with pasta, you want to stir them as soon as you add them in so that they don't stick. And you may use all of the noodles that you've cut, you may not. If you haven't, you can always freeze them for later. But you want to get a good amount in there because you don't want it to be soupy when it's done. So you're going to bring it back to a rapid boil. You're going to turn it down to just a low simmer, and then you're going to cover it with a lid and cook it for about 20 or 30 minutes. The noodles have been cooking for about 1/2 hour, and you can either season them with salt and pepper before you cook them as you drop the noodles in, or afterwards. So just a little bit of salt and some pepper to taste. And then if you want to be authentic, we Hoosiers like to eat our chicken and noodles with a side of mashed potatoes.